The first day of the NFL draft is finally here, so we're going to answer two of the biggest questions around the New Orleans Saints heading into day one. Will they draft a quarterback at 16 or 19? And what will they do with their pair of first-round selections? We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays over on Locked On NFL, and every single Monday through Friday here on Locked On Saints. Coming at you from Dallas, Texas, which is where we're going to have our 3-day, 7-round live NFL draft show out of WFAA Studios. It's going to be a ton of fun, so make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On NFL YouTube page for that. And make sure you join me tonight. We'll be premiering a second episode today, a final draft preview episode at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time, which will lead you into that Locked On NFL YouTube coverage. So on today's episode, this morning's episode, what I want to do is focus on what I think the Saints will do, predictive, as opposed to what I want them to do, right? And so we have to answer two big questions. On top of what will the Saints do in the first round, the biggest question of the New Orleans Saints sort of draft cycle so far has been, will they select a quarterback in the first round of this year's draft? Something to keep in mind that the Saints, of course, haven't spent a first-round pick on a quarterback in quite some time, since the 1970s. And so this would be a completely new sort of situation for the New Orleans Saints if they did it. Since 1971 is the last time that they had selected a quarterback in the first round. So that would be a big-time change from what the New Orleans Saints have done over the course of the recent past, especially with a starting caliber quarterback already on the roster. So I'm going to tell you now why I don't think the Saints will select a quarterback in the first round. But let me say this. Just because I don't think that they will doesn't mean that they won't. I have the advantage right now of being able to sort of speculate. What the Saints will have to do effectively is react. If the top 4 tackles are off the board, 4 of the top wide receivers are off the board, and there's some news today about why that might be the case. We'll talk about that as we close out today's show. As a team in the late 20s might be looking to move up for a wide receiver, for instance, that could impact the Saints draft strategy. The Saints may end up having to go with positional value. And that's not always going to be the case, especially in a weak quarterback class and in a season to where you don't necessarily need to grab a quarterback right now. So while I don't think that they should grab a quarterback, there's a chance that it could still happen because that's the way that the board falls, whether it be at 16 or 19, and that the positional value is something that maybe I undervalue as opposed to what NFL teams overvalue. I sent this out this morning. I think that the draft for the New Orleans Saints begins at pick 3. Could begin at pick 3. Picks 3 and 4 are ones that you're going to want to watch. Do they get moved? You have the Houston Texans and the New York Jets there. Both of them select twice within the top 15. The Jets select twice within the top 10. There's a good chance that they could potentially look to trade back. In fact, Houston reports are that they've already been looking to trade back and out of pick 3. So with that being the case, if some team is looking to trade up into the top 5, they're probably going to take a quarterback if they're doing that, or they're moving up from one of those tackles. Either way, it impacts and begins the ripple effect that impacts who's still on the board for the Saints at 16 and then again at 19 if the Saints stay there. I'll tell you why I don't think that they will in just a moment. So the next piece for New Orleans is, if they were to take a quarterback, who is the quarterback that would be worth it? Again, I don't know that any quarterbacks are going to be worth it. But Malik Willis is really the only one, and the only other quarterback that I think fits with the New Orleans Saints is Desmond Ridder. Now, I'm very much of the school of thought that you let Jameis just do Jameis this year. And this is the first year that he's coming in, and that he knows that he's the starting quarterback. There's no quarterback competition. Don't muddy the waters. I had the same thing that I said on draft day last year, right? Don't muddy the waters in the middle of a quarterback competition. In this situation, don't muddy the waters when you have a surefire starter for you already on the roster. Just make sure that you load up and give him the weapons that he needs to have a good year. Here's the big reason why I don't think the New Orleans Saints will take a quarterback in this year's draft. They traded away next year's first-round pick. And some folks look at that and say, well, they traded away next year's first-round pick when there's already going to be such a good quarterback class, so they're passing on next year's quarterback class, so they must be looking to take a quarterback this year. I think that's really diminishing. I think that's really reductionist. I think, personally, the Saints agreed. Remember, Mickey Loomis talked about this in his presser yesterday. I mentioned we were going to talk about some stuff from his presser. He didn't give us a lot in terms of what the draft plan was, unsurprisingly, but we know he brought the goatee back, so we know things are getting real. And we know that the Philadelphia Eagles initiated the talks with the New Orleans Saints for the trade that ended up giving them 16 and 19 in this year's draft. So the Saints didn't go out and actively look to move away from next year's quarterback class. In fact, New Orleans Saints could very well still be involved in next year's quarterback class if Sean Payton comes back to coaching. If he comes back to coaching, he's still technically under contract with the New Orleans Saints. He won't return to coach the New Orleans Saints, which means the Saints then have the ability to be able to trade his rights away and get draft capital from the Chargers or the Cowboys or wherever it is that he ends up coaching next. I hope it's not the Cowboys. I think the Chargers are pretty likely. You already see so much New Orleans Saints prep happening over there, right? Joe Lombardi's over there, Brendan Nugent's over there, Will Clapp signing over there. Like, there's so much New Orleans to Los Angeles already happening in the pipeline. I could very much see Sean Payton ending up in Los Angeles next year if he comes back to coaching. But the Saints will get a first-round pick back for that. So they could still get into next year's quarterback class. The other piece of it for me is that you gave up next year's first-round pick, which means that you expect it to be a late first-round pick, which means you expect to compete this year. And wasting a first-round pick on a player that might not see the field until 2024, 2025 is not going to help you improve your draft situation or compete in 2022, which is clearly what the New Orleans Saints feel that they can do in this upcoming season. And from that very same trade that led many people to believe, yes, the Saints are moving for a quarterback. Those are reasons why I actually think they're not moving for a quarterback, didn't move for a quarterback, and won't take a quarterback tonight in the first round of the NFL draft unless it's the absolute best positional value and all of those top tackles and wide receivers are off the board. So let's talk about what I think the Saints will do in tonight's first round, because I don't think they're picking at 16 and 19. I think one of those picks is going to end up moving up. I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you who for as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget that as the NFL draft gets started, we've got live coverage for you Thursday, Friday, and Saturday over at the Locked On NFL YouTube page. I'm going to remind you about it a bunch because I'm super excited about it. I'm here, WFAA. I can literally see it out the window. We're going to be right in there at one of the studios getting ready and bringing you some phenomenal coverage of the NFL draft for all 7 rounds. Make sure you head over to Locked On NFL, the YouTube page, and subscribe today. When the NFL draft is over, we're going to be right around the corner from Mother's Day. And you want to make sure that you give your mom the gift that she'll never forget, something that she'll treasure forever. And you can do that by heading over to BlueNile.com. Blue Nile is an online jeweler, the original online jeweler, who makes sure that they're doing everything sustainably. They're doing everything ethically in terms of sourcing all of their beautiful, beautiful diamonds. And you're able to do custom stuff too. You want to customize a ring, maybe customize some gemstone earrings, customize a diamond-studded necklace, whatever it is that you're looking for to make Mother's Day special. It's May 8th, by the way. Don't forget. You want to make sure that you make that day special. BlueNile.com is the place to go. So if you want to check it out, our Locked On Sports listeners are getting $50 off of $500 purchases, and this offer is only good through Mother's Day, so don't miss it. Just use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. Plus, every single order is insured, it ships free, and it arrives in discreet packaging so that it doesn't spoil the surprise that's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece by heading over to BlueNile.com today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, Locked On NFL YouTube page. You're going to want to go and subscribe to it today so that you can get started with all of the live NFL draft coverage starting at 6 p.m. Eastern time this evening on Thursday. And of course, we'll be with you all 3 days of the draft. But for right now, I appreciate you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day as we get you ready for the New Orleans Saints NFL draft, beginning with round 1 tonight. The New Orleans Saints are set to select at 16 and 19, but will they select at 16 and 19? I don't think so. I think the Saints are probably going to end up moving up. So I got a mock draft for you. I promise you we do at least one every day this week. We don't have to do all 7 rounds today. I just want to focus on the first round, though, because that's the big news. That's where we are right now. That should be the focus. we can get to day 2 and 3 on days 2 and 3, because we'll be here with you throughout all of it. So when it comes down to what I think the Saints are going to do tonight, I do think that they could potentially move up for a tackle. That would be the one that makes the most sense to me. So it could be that they're looking to move up into the top 10. There were some reports that they could potentially be looking to move up into like the top 5 or 6, top 5 or so for a quarterback. I don't really buy that, but moving into the top 10 for a tackle makes sense for me. The issue around moving into the top 10 is that you've already given up a first round pick this year in 18. You gave up a first round pick next year in 2023. So if you move one of those additional first round picks, you've now traded effectively 3 first round picks. But I'll excuse that because you're walking away with 2 first round selections. The issue for me would be packaging 16 and 19 to move up into the top 5, because then you've effectively traded 3 first round picks, right? 16, 19, technically 18 as well. So you could even make the argument for 4 first round picks and a first round pick for 2023 in order to move up and select one player, which I think is a kind of a waste of resources in that way, right? Like you're the diminishing returns at that point. You could have walked away with 2 starters, and instead you're moving up into the top 5 to draft a player that's not going to see the field in 2022. I don't see that being a reality for the Saints, but I do see the reality in potentially packaging 16 and a later pick in order to move up to the top 10, top 12 in order to walk away with a tackle. I think if you're going to do that, and if the Saints do that, they will do it for Charles Cross, the offensive tackle out of Mississippi State. He has been my offensive tackle 1 from the very beginning. In terms of the way that I've looked at this entire draft, he has been one of the top overall players for me from the very beginning in this NFL draft. There's a lot of people that are concerned about his ability to be able to translate to the air or translate from the air raid system, during which he pass blocked nearly 80% of the time in Mike Leach's system. But remember, he was recruited to Mississippi State when Mississippi State was effectively running a triple option offense. So he was recruited as a run blocking left tackle. I don't think that he is so far removed from that. You also love the football IQ that comes from the fact that he was able to transition from the run game guy that was or from a guy that was being recruited to be a huge part of a heavy run offense that was throwing the ball maybe like 40-something% of the time. And then during the COVID offseason, as Seth Galina has kind of expressed, he transitioned over to the air raid system and became the best pure pass blocker in this year's draft. And I think that's hands down in terms of what that argument is. So moving up into the top 10, moving up into the top 12 for Charles Cross, to me, feels like a reality for the New Orleans Saints because he's one of their best fits. Yes, he's a little undersized, 6'4", but he's got good size in terms of weight around he hovers around that 320, 315 area. But the thing that I like most about him is that he's also kind of reminiscent of Willie Roaf, right? In terms of his build, his athleticism, things like that. So I like that fit. Maybe it's sentimental, who knows? But I like that fit for the New Orleans Saints. And we know that that is something that can work in the NFL system because we see those sort of shorter tackles around the NFL still as well. Next up at pick 19, when I got up on the board for them, I wanted this to happen because I wanted to be able to react to it again. All 4 of the wide receivers being off the board, all 4 of the top 4 wide receivers being off the board by the time that I circled around back to 19. And in fact, Jahan Dotson had also gone off the board, which was kind of unusual. But how do you pivot from this? What would the New Orleans Saints do? You go to the trenches. This is what the Saints have always done. This is a deep wide receiver class. You can trade up into the second round and, grab George Pickens. You can trade up into the second round and get some of these other guys that are going to be around that are going to fall, right? Even a Jahan Dotson, outside of the weird way that this simulation ended up working out, could be available late in the first round or something like that. So you have some options here in terms of your ability to be able to address wide receiver a little bit later. I also think that there is, and we'll talk about this in tonight's episode, what I would do. There's an argument to be made about passing an offensive tackle in the first round, but we'll talk about that in our episode that'll premiere a little bit later. So what I did with the top 4 wide receivers off the board, instead of reaching for a safety, I went with a guy that I think can get drafted in the middle of the first round, and deservedly so, should get drafted in the middle of the first round. And that's Devonte Wyatt, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. I've drafted him before. We've talked about him before here on the show. I think that he's somebody that can be a penetrating 3-tech, a pass rusher for you that can complement David Onyemata, who can move inside. You have a guy like David Onyemata that can play at 3-tech, but they can also play at 1-tech. The Saints may be looking to find another replacement for Malcolm Brown, which means it could point them in the direction of Jordan Davis instead. I'm a little bit lower on Jordan Davis personally in the first round because I don't like the idea of going for a nose tackle in the first round. That's some Carolina Panthers draft strategy, and that's not really worked out for them in a long time. And so for me, I think that going for the guy that can be a pass rusher, that can be a backfield disruptor, that has some, of that athleticism that you really, really like, that you can see on the game tape as opposed to just at the combine, that pushes me towards a guy like Devonte Wyatt more than a guy like Jordan Davis. But either one of them could be the selection here. And either one of them, if I were you, I would consider a realistic selection for the Saints if they're on the board at 19, right? And depending upon how the board falls, even at 16. I had the Saints trading up in this situation, but had I waited, probably all of the offensive tackles would have been off the board by 16. I would have had to go with wide receiver at that point. And then by the time that I got to pick 19, probably would have gone interior defensive line again because the offensive tackles would have been off the board, right? So because of that, and I had already filled my need at wide receiver, I would have been forced to sort of go the other way. But because I think the Saints will trade up here, because I just expect them to be aggressive, it put me in position to really load up on the trenches, which feels very New Orleans Saints, does it? And that doesn't just stop with Sean Payton. That's Mickey Loomis. That's Jeff Ireland. That's the people that have been in the building over the course of since 2015, whose tendencies that we've been talking about. Remember, the Saints, 2 positions that they have drafted the absolute most over the course of the last, 6 years, since 2015, so 7 years, have been offensive line and defensive line. That's where they go. They go in the trenches. So that's what I think the Saints are probably going to end up doing again today, because they'll feel that they can circle back around to wide receiver in the second round. Do I agree with that approach? No. I think they should go wide receiver right off the bat. Make sure that they get somebody that's going to be an absolute game changer for them. They've spent so much time focusing on the defense when it comes to free agency. Focus on the offense when it comes to this draft. And in particular, if you're going to sacrifice going after wide receiver or tackle in the first round, I would sacrifice going tackle, because at least you have somebody in the building that will be able to serve at left tackle if you need to. You don't necessarily have that complimentary wide receiver opposite Michael Thomas at this time. And even if you sign Jarvis Landry, you're not going to finish the work at wide receiver with just that one signing. All right, let's talk a little bit next about how the New Orleans Saints draft strategy could be impacted by a team in the late 20s trading up in front of the Saints for a wide receiver. I'll tell you what team you should be looking out for, and we'll also talk about some other draft rumors that you need to know about that could impact the way that the Saints see this draft as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. You want to get involved maybe in some over-unders for tonight's draft, a bunch of prop bets for tonight's first round. There's so much for you to be able to take advantage of over at betonline.net. Who will be the first quarterback off the board? When will the first quarterback go? Over-unders on individual prospects. What position teams will take a look at? There's a ton for you to check out. So head over to BetOnline today and get in on the action. If you don't want to bet on the NFL draft, there's also the playoffs with basketball going on. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans, Jake Madison, Pels, Suns again this evening, Thursday, big day in New Orleans. And of course, the Major League Baseball season, which is now underway. So there is no limit of things that you can get in on, even esports and live betting available for you at BetOnline as well. So head over there on your computer or your mobile device today so you can get in on all of the odds, bets, props, lines, trends, action, whatever it is that you're looking for. They got you covered over at BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at I want to talk about a team that could ruin everything for the New Orleans Saints in this year's draft. Not really ruin everything, but can certainly impact the Saints draft strategy if wide receiver is a big target for them in the first round. Sean Payton spoke on a podcast here recently, mentioned offensive tackle, mentioned cornerback, safety, mentioned wide receiver as a spot that he said, quote, I know that they want to address this. Mickey Loomis talked a bit about, quarterbacks and how he doesn't really want to get into that conversation, said that with a smile and a goatee. And then he also talked about how the Philadelphia Eagles came to the Saints about that trade that got the Saints 16 and 19. And he said specifically that they liked the trade because it could put them in position to walk away with 2 first-round players or get another first-round player a year early. So I think that tells you that the Saints really, really like this year's draft class. I think a big part of that are the wide receivers. Wide receivers and the offensive tackles in this year's draft, and the edge rushers as well, especially at the top of the draft, though. So I don't really include them in the Saints part of the conversation because they're, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 kind of area. Top 5 area. I don't know why I counted it up. But because you have Mickey Loomis talking about getting 2 players, you've got Sean Payton talking about how they know that they're going to, how he knows that they want to get another wide receiver, all of that. All the signs tend to point to wide receiver and trenches being the focus in the first round. And if they can walk away with 2 of those 3, they'd be pretty happy about that. Remember, Mickey Loomis saying, want to be able to get this first round pick in a year early. So 2 players makes a lot of sense. So if that is indeed the case, there's one team to watch that could potentially move up ahead of the New Orleans Saints in the top 20 or the top 15. So you're looking at either being impacted at 16 or impacted at 19 to target a wide receiver. And that is the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs have done this before. Hello, Patrick Mahomes, right? So you have the Kansas City Chiefs right now picking at 29 and 30 after they traded away Tyreek Hill with now a big need at wide receiver. Packaging those two selections together and moving into the top 15 is very much a reality. Packaging those two picks together and moving up into the top 20, even more of a reality. So if the Kansas City Chiefs do that with wide receiver in mind, that could foil a little bit of what the New Orleans Saints could potentially be looking to do. Now, you have to anticipate when you're an NFL team that there's going to be trades. If you looked at any mock drafts today and the first 12 picks are teams selecting where they're slated to pick, the mock draft is wrong. Simple. There's going to be a bunch of moves. There's going to be a bunch of, trades and all that other stuff. And Kansas City could very well be involved in that. So when you're a team and you're mocking all of these different scenarios, when you do your own mock drafts based upon the information you have about other teams, what in terms of where they're going to select, or who they're going to select, what positions they're looking for, but also mocking trades and trying to create an expectation of teams that might move up ahead of you, you build scenarios for all of these different sort of situations. Remember, we talked in a couple of episodes ago about how unpredictable the NFL draft is, and you only get one shot at it. It's not a mock draft simulator to where you restart if you don't like it, right? You get one shot at it and that's it. So you don't get to say, okay, well, usually this happens. There's none of that. So for the New Orleans Saints, they have to be ready for a team like the Kansas City Chiefs to jump ahead of them. A team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who reportedly are in love with Lewis Seen. We're going to get to that in a second, who could potentially move up as well. Some of these other teams that could look to move up. And you have a lot of teams that select twice in the first round. 8 different teams. It would be an NFL record if that happened. Don't expect that to happen. It's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be packaging those 2 first rounders to move up, or they're going to be, trading back out of one of their 2 pair of first rounders. The fewest amount of NFL teams selecting in the first round in NFL history right now, in terms of since it was a draft of 32 teams. Okay. So watch out for the Kansas City Chiefs. Watch for picks 3 and 4, because if those two picks get traded and those 2 teams trade back, that starts the ripple effect early in terms of what's available for the Saints at 16 and 19. Otherwise, if there's no trade in the top 5, the draft starts at 6. Whatever Carolina does, if they go for quarterback, then that means one quarterback off the board, even less likely than that the Saints take a quarterback at that point once Malik Willis is off the board, right? Because I don't think Kenny Pickett's the guy. I'm sorry. I don't get it. I don't see it. There might be fans in the building, but I don't see it. And then after that, you get to Atlanta at 8. That could be a quarterback situation. You get to Seattle at 9. That could be a quarterback situation as well. But I'm just excited to see which day 3 prospect the Seattle Seahawks take in the top 10. Can't wait. Quay Walker is a name to watch there. He's not a day 3 prospect. He's probably the best linebacker in the draft, but Lewis Seen, Quay Walker are going to be 2 guys to watch for Seattle. That could be unexpected selections that end up impacting who's available on the board for the Saints. Because if you get a top 10 linebacker, then that's pushing some wide receiver, some offensive tackle, or some interior defensive lineman down the board in favor of New Orleans, which is good news. Or it increases the trade value for one of those trades because a quarterback stays on the board or whatever. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. So the ripple effect starts at the latest at 6, but could start as early as 3. Watch for those, and watch for the Kansas City Chiefs trading up into the top 20 or top 25 for a wide receiver and how that could impact the New Orleans Saints. Last piece. We talked yesterday about 7 different surprise first round selections that could take place in the NFL draft in the first round here. There are 3 players specifically that we talked about that are getting a lot of buzz this morning. Lewis Seen, the safety out of Georgia. The Saints have a big time need at safety. Lewis Seen is a fantastic safety, so watch for that. The other players actually you got another one from Georgia who is George Pickens, the wide receiver. Watch for him to a team like the Green Bay Packers, for instance, late first round. But he could be somebody that the Saints could potentially land at 19 and feel very comfortable with. He's kind of a little bit more of an X-type receiver, so he's kind of a copy of Michael Thomas. But if Michael Thomas and his contract expires in a few years and then he doesn't stick around in New Orleans, then it's nice to have a wide receiver on a rookie contract that you could transition over to. And then you have a guy that can play a complementary role before that, because he's a bit of a developmental field stretcher for sure. And then the other player to really watch that could potentially creep into the first round here is going to be David Ojabo into the edge rusher, from Michigan. I don't think that the Saints would go this route, but getting him in the first round, getting a 5th-year option off of that Achilles tear that he unfortunately suffered during his Michigan Pro Day, that just sucks. He could be somebody that gets drafted in the first round, put on ice for a year, and all that. But that would probably be toward the back part of the draft. So I don't know that that's going to impact the Saints unless they were to trade back. Watch the Packers or something like that for that one. Last one, somebody else that could sneak into the first round. I just mentioned him, but it's another Georgia defender. Lots of Georgia players going in this year's draft, no doubt about that. Quay Walker, linebacker out of Georgia. Nakobe Dean is the one that's been getting a lot of talk, but Quay Walker, I think, is exceptionally better than Nakobe Dean. I think they're both very good, but I think Quay Walker's size sets him apart from Nakobe Dean, who's a little undersized. He's in that 5'11" area. He would be another one that could potentially creep up into the first round. I don't think that the Saints would go after him. Don't think they have a need for a first round linebacker, but depending upon how early he creeps up, like Seattle, for instance, at 9, that could potentially impact who's available on the board at 16 and 19. Okay, those are your draft day rumors. That's what I think the Saints are going to do in this year's draft, and that's why I don't think that the Saints are going to select a quarterback in the first round unless they have no other choice and the positional value outweighs the remaining prospects on the board. Coming up later on today, we'll go through what I want the New Orleans Saints to do. We'll do a mock draft there, and we'll talk more about a bunch of other, rumors, draft day rumors, things like that are coming out. And I want to commend the New Orleans Saints because we haven't heard any draft day rumors. It's been crickets coming out of the Saints facility, and I want to tell you why I think that changed. So we've got that coming up for you later on today in our 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time premiere episodes. Make sure you come through for that on YouTube where you can join in and chat with everybody that's watching along. I appreciate you, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget to go and check out Locked On NFL Draft, their final mock draft today, as well as the draft day trades to watch. Ryan Tracy, he's a Chiefs analyst. He may be able to talk a little bit more about the Chiefs trading into the top 20, top 15. So go and check out Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, getting you ready for the Locked On NFL Draft today. And don't forget, NFL Draft live coverage tonight, beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, same time as our premiere episode. So you can come check out the premiere episode and then head over to the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Thanks as always, y'all, for making me a part of your daily routine. As always, for everything else you need in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.